Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wa salatu wa salamu ala ashrafil anbiya wal mursaleen. Muhammadur Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam. Tasliman kathiran kathira. Famma ba'du. My brothers and sisters, in this session on living Islam, I want to mention to you the hadith of Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, where he said, narrated by Jundubbin Abdullah radiallahu anhu, he said, we were with Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and we were strong youths. So we learned faith before we learned Qur'an. Then we learned Qur'an and our faith increased thereby. He said, radiallahu anhu, which means we were with Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam as strong youths, and we learnt faith before we learned Qur'an, and then when we learned the Qur'an, it increased and strengthened our faith. Now, if you think about this hadith, first of all, if you look at the Meccan period of the life of Mirza Yawar Baig, then for a great part of that period, there was not much Qur'an revealed. So that's the first thing to understand. Second thing, or rather before that, is to understand the issue of creating a foundation on which knowledge is built. It's like a platform on which your apps and your software runs. It's extremely important to have a strong platform which has integrity, a strong platform which is free from fault, if you want the apps and the software to run properly on that platform. If the platform has weaknesses, and if you are running something on it, then either that thing malfunctions or the whole thing crashes. Now, the same principle applies as far as Islam is concerned, because Islam is the name of a practice. Islam is not the name of a theory which can be studied in bits and pieces as you want. Islam is the name of a practice. And when you look at the practice, then it is critical to understand that the success of any practice is based on the strength of the foundation, the strength of the practice, the strength of the platform on which that practice runs. Let me give you my favorite analogy that I always give, which is with martial arts. What happens, so those of you who have been to any martial art classes, you know this. What happens to you? What is the first thing that you learn when you go into a martial arts class? You learn to fall, right? They teach you to fall. 10,000 times you have to learn to fall. Because that is the platform on which everything else is based. Why is learning to fall? Why is it the platform? Because it teaches humility. It teaches you to protect yourself when you are down and how to go down in a way that you don't hurt yourself. It teaches you the fact that you can actually fall, and it builds your confidence to say that if just because you fell, it doesn't mean you have to stay there. You can get up. Now, because of all this, then when you learn the other moves and the other holds and the other blows and throws, then everything else sits perfectly on it. Now, Islam is the name of a practice. Islam is the name of living a method of life, a deen. It's not just a religion, it's not just a madhab, it is not just a set of rituals of worship. Islam is a complete and total way of life. Because it's a complete and total way of life, therefore the purpose of Islam is not to fill your head or my head with a bunch of technical terms, istilahat, or with some theories, some theological constructs. The purpose of Islam is to help us to practice Islam. And where that whole thing begins is in understanding who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is. Not just knowing about Allah, it can begin there, but knowing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the core of our hearts. Where when the name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala comes before us, something happens to us. إِنَّمَا الْمُؤْمِنُونَ الَّذِينَ إِذَا ذُكِرَ اللَّهُ وَجِلَتْ قُلُوبُهُم. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, verily the mu'mineen, the believers are those who when Allah is mentioned, there is an effect on their hearts. There is something that happens to their hearts. Their hearts react to the word, to the name, to the call, to the sound, to the thought of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala jalla jalaluhu. The hearts respond, the hearts react, not dead hearts. This is the sign of a believer, that his or her heart must respond to the name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala jalla jalaluhu. When he hears the adhan, Allahu Akbar, it must do something to him. When he stands in salah and he says Allahu Akbar, it must do something to him. When he reads the name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Qur'an, when he listens to the name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Qur'an, when anyone mentions Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to him, it must do something to that person. This is one of the reasons why it is not recommended and it is disliked to keep on saying things like Wallah and by Allah and things like this, because it reduces the magnificence and glory and magnitude of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the heart. It just becomes a takiya kalam, it just becomes a way of speaking. Wallahi, this tea is so nice. Wallah, this is good. Wallah, this is bad. No. Because you're swearing, you're taking an oath by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is a very, very serious matter. This is an extremely serious matter. There's nothing that can be more serious than taking an oath by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So it's not something to be done just like that without thinking remotely, just by default. It's something that you must put some thought into. There is a famous quote of Sayyidah Aisha Siddiqa radiallahu anha. She said the first bid'ah in this community of Muslims was when people started taking the name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala without the glory and magnificence of Allah in their hearts. Now see the beautiful words of our mother Sayyidah Aisha Siddiqa radiallahu anha. She says that the first bid'ah, the first innovation, reprehensible innovation in this ummah was that people started taking the name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala without that feeling of glory and magnificence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in their hearts. We know the hadith of Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam, where he would be with the family, he would be laughing and joking with them and whatever it was he was doing, and then suddenly he would hear the adhan, and Sayyidah Aisha Siddiqa radiallahu anha says that it was like a switch. It was like some sudden change that would come on him, and he would be like as if he doesn't know us at all. Completely cut off and divorced from whatever is happening around him because he heard the call Allahu Akbar. We know the story of Sayyidina Ali bin Abi Talib radiallahu anhu. When he heard the call Allahu Akbar, his face would become white. His face would lose all color, the blood would drain from his face, and somebody asked him, what happened to you, sir? You look like you are in shock. He said, didn't you hear the call? Allahu Akbar. Allahu Akbar. This is the sign of Imaan in the believer. So Jundubbin Abdullah radiallahu anhu was saying that this is what Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam inculcated in us before he taught us the Qur'an. Now, if you take the Makkan period, see this, that in the Makkan period, the tests that came on the Muslims were very, very severe, extremely severe, where they were tested in ways, people lost their lives, people were tortured, people were harassed, all kinds of things happened to them for no reason other than that they said La ilaha illallah. Abu Jahl killed Sumayya bint Khayyat radiallahu anha, the first martyr of this deen. Abu Jahl speared her and killed her, and then her husband, Abu Ammar, Yasir radiallahu anhu, Abu Jahl had him ripped apart by tying horses to his limbs. Right? I mean, imagine this. It's not just killing somebody. This is killing somebody in a very, very horrible way. What happened to Abu Jahl? Nothing. Nothing happened to him. And did Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, after this happened, did Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam say to his companions? There are plenty of people who were there, and brave people, and mashallah, people more than capable. Did he say to any of them, take out Abu Jahl, finish Abu Jahl, assassinate Abu Jahl, kill Abu Jahl? Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam didn't give this kind of an order. What did he say to the Muslims? He said, have sabr. He said, have sabr. Let me give you an example of what I mean by having a foundation before you get any results. And I think one of the best examples that I can give you is that of the prohibition of alcohol in the United States and what happened with it. Now, in 1919, the 18th Amendment to the US Constitution was passed, which paved the way a year later for the ban on the manufacture, sale, or transportation of intoxicating liquors within and the importation thereof or the exportation thereof from the United States. And this is, I'm reading it off the thing. Now, the point is that, as they say, this didn't prevent you from consuming alcohol if you had some stuff stashed away in the privacy of your home. You could do that. Nobody was going to stop you from doing that. But manufacture, transportation, sale, import, export, all this was banned in 1920, and this was a constitutional amendment that was done. Now, this was interestingly, anyway, so let me continue. Now, this continued, it was enforced. Quite literally, millions of dollars were spent on enforcement, on catching of illicit manufacture of liquor, on the disposal of whatever was caught, liquor. It was literally sort of poured down the drain. Thousands of people, probably hundreds of thousands of people got jailed. All sorts of things happened in terms of enforcement, including quite literally thousands of people died from drinking tainted liquor, because obviously when you have this kind of a prohibition, when you put it in, when there is no foundation for it, when the people don't want it and you impose a law like this, then immediately actions happen to subvert that. So illegal distillation of liquor became a huge business. So illegal distillation, illegal transport, and so on. So people got charged, they got jailed, many died. And in that process, because now you are illegally producing something, God knows what went into that. So thousands of people, quite literally thousands of people, died of drinking tainted liquor. Now all this happened, and this became such a misery that in 1933, by the 21st Amendment, this was cancelled. Now, very interestingly, this is the only constitutional amendment in US history ever to be rescinded, ever to be withdrawn. The only constitutional amendment in US history that was ever made and then withdrawn. It was, they call it a success because it proved a constitutional point, but it was a colossal failure because obviously the purpose for which it was put in the first place, that purpose was not achieved, and the result of so many years of so much misery and so on and so forth, and ended in nothing. Now, point I'm making is this. Contrast that with Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam and how prohibition was uh, affected. I will not say enforced, because it was really never enforced. There was no need for enforcement. How prohibition was affected in or by Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. And we'll tie that back to the issue of ta'allam al-iman. Qabla ta'allam al-Qur'an. So that if people learned Iman before they learned the Quran. Now, what happened with that? Now, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, of course, revealed ayat of, at different levels, where He stopped, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala disliked and finally completely prohibited the consumption of alcohol, and by inference of all intoxicants. So Abu Hurairah radiallahu anhu says that he said, I was in my house and I was pouring drinks for my friends, and he named some of the Sahaba of Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam in that. And he said, when we heard the caller who announced the revelation of the ayah, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, Al-Khamru wal-Maisiru wal-Ansabu wal-Azlamu rijusum min amali shaitan fajtanibu la'allahum tuflihun. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu innamal khamru wal maisiru wal ansabu wal azlamu rijsum min amali shaitani fajtanibuhu la'allakum tuflihun. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, though, O you who believe, intoxicants, so all kinds of intoxicants, gambling, idolatrous practices, which is all forms of, superstitious stuff, and divining of future, so all sorts of future telling, fortune telling, are loathsome evil of shaitan's doing. They are rijusum min amali shaitan. They are the worst of the deeds of shaitan. Fajtanibu, stay far away, shun those, la'allakum tuflihun, so that you might be successful. Now, Abu Hurairah says that when this ayat was revealed, he says, I was pouring the drink, I moved my hand, and the drink was poured onto the ground. He said, those who had the drink in their cups, they emptied the cups. If somebody had a mouthful of drink, if they had taken a sip, they didn't swallow that sip, they spat it out. Then the Sahaba, Abu Hurairah said that the streets and the drains in Medina had liquor flowing in them, had alcohol flowing in them, wine flowing in them, because people were just getting rid of their stocks. Now, these were people who used to manufacture. I mean, these were the people who were, they didn't have factories as far as I know, but people manufactured wine and liquor in their homes, right? They used to squeeze grapes, they used to squeeze dates and so on and so forth, and they would manufacture. So all of this stockpiled liquor was literally thrown down the drain. Then the Sahaba did an amazing thing. They broke the utensils in which they used to store the drink. So somebody went and told Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, they said, Ya Rasulullah, they're smashing the jars and the utensils. Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam called them, and he said, why are you doing that? There's no need to do that. Just wash them and you can use them for, to store other things and for any other purpose. There is no need to smash the utensil. They said, Ya Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, we do not even want to be reminded of a time when we used to disobey Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? Now think about that. Were they disobeying Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala at all? Because before the ayat of prohibition came, It was not prohibited. So if somebody was consuming alcohol, he was not disobeying Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He was doing something which was not good in itself. Intrinsically, this was bad. And this is the beauty of Islam. We need to understand this. Sometimes people feel, oh, but there are so many restrictions in Islam. The key thing is that Islam restricts only things which are by nature, by themselves, toxic. Somebody asked me about 20 years ago when I used to live here, I was invited to speak at there was a gathering, there was a meeting in UMass, and I was invited to speak there. So after I finished my speech, it was a speech on Islam. There was a lady in the back. She asked. She has a question. She said, "What is the Sharia? What is the Sharia?" So I said to her that the Sharia is the way that any decent, honest, socially conscious, compassionate, and honorable person would like to behave. Right? If you want to set a set of rules to say that I want to behave like a decent, honest, socially conscious, responsible, compassionate human being, what must I do? The set of rules that you would enumerate or set for that person, I said this, you would call this the Sharia, because what does the Sharia tell us to do? What does the Sharia prohibit? It prohibits intoxication. Right? Now tell me, what is good about intoxication? Forget about the religion. I'm just saying a simple question. What is good about intoxication? Why even use the word toxic? Intoxication is a derivative of the word toxic. So why do you call it toxic? If it is good, why do you call it toxic? We know it is bad, yet we still use it. One of the big reasons why prohibition in the United States failed was because they realized the kind of revenue that the government could earn by taxing alcohol. They were losing out. So the reason for repealing the law was only because of money. You say, well, you know what, why are we letting this income go? So you're saying that if you have to weigh two things on a scale, one is what is beneficial for people and the other one is what makes money, then what makes money will always give precedence to what is beneficial for people. Right? Just now as I am speaking, the minimum wage in the United States in 2009 was $7.25 per hour. The minimum wage right now, 2021, is still $7.25 per hour. Between 2009 and 2021, no change in minimum wage. The current government wanted to raise it to $15 an hour. The thing failed. Didn't happen. Because if you have a bunch of capitalists sitting to rule on this thing, they are not going to rule in favor of what is good for the poor. So when you have two sets of things, one is what is good for society and the other one is what makes money, you're always going to rule in terms of what makes money because that's what's driving you. Islam says, no, sorry, it doesn't work like that. We rule in terms of what is good for society. And if in that process, if it doesn't make money, very good. You should not make money in toxic ways. Sale of alcohol, production of alcohol, sale and production of any intoxicant, sale and production of any tobacco products, cigarettes and so on and so forth. Tell me, why is cigarette smoking not banned? Why is the manufacture of cigarettes not banned? You go to Saudi Arabia, you've got big billboards, right? Talking about how tobacco consumption is prohibited, how in Islam, how it is toxic, how it is haram, how cigarette smoking is haram. Big billboards. But cigarettes can be bought. You can go to a shop and buy cigarettes. So how come the government does not ban the sale and manufacture of cigarettes? Because they're making money out of it. They're taxing them. Take, for example, the sale and consumption of marijuana for recreational purposes. What do you call a pot party? What do you call a bunch of people sitting together and smoking joints? Recreational use of marijuana. Now, recreational use of marijuana has been made legal in the United States, in Canada, and so on and so forth. Okay, fantastic, beautiful, right? Very nice. You want to go and smoke a bunch of joints, please go ahead. It's no longer illegal. My point is, then what did you jail all those people in the 60s and 70s for? The hippies. What were they doing which was so bad? They were doing exactly the same thing. They were doing exactly the same thing. And the within quotes, the beauty is that a lot of people before this thing was made legal who were caught and who were sentenced to prison on this charge, on the within quotes recreational use of marijuana, are still sitting in prison even though the law is no longer valid. Even though the law has been removed, it is now legal. So why don't you go back to those people and say, look, I mean, you know what? I mean, you were jailed unnecessarily because this thing was is now legal. So obviously, if it is now legal, then it must have been good even then. But that's not how our worldly laws work. Islam does not say that. Islam says what is good, what is bad. What is good cannot become bad just because there is a fad or something, mood changes or something. And what is bad cannot become good for the same kinds of reasons. What is intrinsically good will remain intrinsically good forever. What is intrinsically bad will remain intrinsically bad forever. And the consumption of alcohol, all forms of intoxicants, is intrinsically bad and toxic. That is why it is called intoxicant. And therefore Islam prohibits it and it remains prohibited. Now, the point I'm making, I'm saying all of this because what is it that enabled Rasulullah simply to tell people Allah has prohibited and people obeyed? Whereas in the United States and in many countries, including India, prohibition has been tried and failed over and over again. Despite police, despite enforcement, despite millions and probably billions of dollars worth of expenditure, despite all kinds of misery, prisons and whatnot, still prohibition could not be implemented. Why? Because the foundation of obedience to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did not exist. The people were not convinced. I want to drink. I don't believe that this thing is bad for me. Whereas when the people were conditioned, when their Imaan had already been built and they knew who Allah is. Now when they know who Allah is, then obeying Allah is, just happens. I mean, there's no way that it won't happen. They know who Allah is. They know, of course, Allah is Allah. Alhamdulillah. One of I remember listening to a beautiful lecture once, and may Allah bless the Shaykh, he gave this very nice example. He said that take a little kid, 3-4-year-old child who is playing in the street. He's talking about, the small communities in our countries where there's no yard and playground and stuff. So children literally play in the streets. So he said this little kid, 3-4-year-old, he is or 5-year-old, whatever, he's playing around in the street, and the general, the commanding officer of the army comes, and he's fully in combat uniform. He has a sidearm and whatnot, and everything else. This kid will look at him, he'll laugh, he'll wave to him. He's not afraid of the man. But the same kid, his mother sticks her head out of the window and she said, come here, otherwise watch this. Come here or this. Now she's just showing her hand. That kid will turn and run back. So he says, how come the kid is not afraid of somebody who has this power and authority and weapons, and he's afraid of his mother? She's just showing her hand. Because the kid knows the mother. The kid has felt this hand on his bottom. Whereas the kid does not know this general, and he doesn't understand the uniform, he doesn't understand weapons and whatnot. When we know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when we understand the glory and magnificence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when we have a ta'alluq with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when the word and the name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does something in our hearts, right? when the word and name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does something to us in our hearts. That is when obedience is instantaneous. Because I know who is Allah, I have the glory and magnificence of Allah in my heart. I am sure and certain that one day I am going to meet Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and I want to make sure that I do everything in my power to make sure that that meeting is a great meeting. And I have this ta'alluq with Allah. I love Allah. And I want Allah to love me. I want to be in a situation where I raise my hand for dua and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not reject my dua. Now obviously I cannot do that by disobeying Allah. So what do? I ensure that I obey Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I ensure that I never do anything to disobey Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? So when an order of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is presented to me, then I don't even think. Not because I'm following blindly, but because I'm following with knowledge. And my knowledge is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is in control. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, whatever He orders is only for the good. Allah does not give any order which is destructive by itself. And that one day I will meet Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will question me about what I did. Allah will not say what happened. Allah will not ask what happened. Allah will ask, what did you do? Right? And that is the whole point of taqwa. So, ta'allam al-iman, he said, we learned iman. This is what Rasulullah was teaching them. And alhamdulillah, they learnt it beautifully. So when the orders came, there was no need for enforcement. Rasulullah didn't spend a single dollar on enforcement. There was no jail in Medina. There was no police in Medina. Nabi Sallallahu didn't send people, shurta, house to house, to catch people who were drinking illicitly or who had stills manufacturing illicit liquor. Nothing. There was no need for any enforcement because the enforcement had already been done in a different way. The enforcement of the glory and magnificence of Allah. The enforcement of the love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Jalla Jalaluhu, if it can be called enforcement. I mean, the fact that these were people who loved Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala beyond anything else. وَالَّذِينَ آمَنُوا أَشَدُّ حُبًّا لِلَّهِ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was their witness. Allah said, the believers, they love Allah more than anyone and anything else. So obeying was, it was a dream. I mean, it was a automatic thing. It happened. Yes, of course. What else? My brothers and sisters, that is the power of this. Now today, unfortunately, we have taken Islamic education, and believe me, all of this is post-industrial revolution, 1726, right, onwards. There were no schools and madrasas the way we know them today before the industrial revolution. This is all post-industrial revolution. And the tragedy is that even our religious schools are patterned exactly on the same model as the secular schools. There's no difference. The only difference is the books we teach. We teach one set of books in the secular schools, we teach another set of books in the religious schools, but that system is exactly the same. Which is, there is a teacher, the teacher teaches the books, the assumption is the kids do not know, teacher knows. The job of the children is to study, meaning memorize and pass exams. The teachers teach them how to pass exams, neither of them actually knows anything. Same system in the secular schools. That's exactly what happens in secular schools as well. Secular schools are a little bit better in the context that at least for the sciences there is some level of experimentation, some level of practical, practicals and practical experience. In religious schools, in our madaris, there is no experimentation, there are no experiments, there is no practical experience of really experiencing the religion. Whatever the mashayikh used to do has been lost. Does not exist anymore. not part of the curriculum. The curriculum is to study the books and then go give an exam, and once you have finished the exam, you pass or you fail, and on that basis you are granted your degree and you call yourself alim or mufti or whatever. And exactly the same thing happens in a secular school. This is not how Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam taught. He did not run a school, he didn't run a creche, he didn't run a maktab, he did not run a Darul Uloom, he did not run a Jamia. He trained and he created and he molded and he raised tarbiyatul rijal. He did tarbiyah of noble people, of men, and when we say men, that is not meant as a gender comment, it's meant as people of nobility, men and women. Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam never taught children. Right? There were children who were around him, but he never ran a class for children. He didn't have a children's education program. He taught the parents, and the parents went home and taught their children, which did two good things. One is that the revision of your teaching is good for the one who is teaching, and it built a relationship between the parents and children, which by and large does not exist today. And that was the relationship between the teacher and the student. The children respected the father or the mother because the father and the mother was the root through which they learned about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is how he taught. But we have discarded that whole system. Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam focused on the platform. And the platform was what? And is what? Is the knowledge of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Is the irfan of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Is the ma'arifah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Is feeling Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in your heart and my heart. When we stand in salah, what happens to us? Nothing happens to us. Our thoughts are all over the place. We have problem concentrating in the zikr. Zikr means remembrance, and we are forgetful in the zikr, which is an oxymoronic thing. It is theoretically impossible because they are two opposite things. Zikr is remembrance, forgetfulness is ghafla. Two opposite things. How can two opposite things simultaneously coexist in one place? They cannot, which means that if you think that is happening, then one of them is missing. Fire and water cannot coexist in the same place. So if you think there is fire and water in the same place, you need to go and check it's either only the fire or only the water. The two cannot possibly coexist in the same place. That exactly in the same way, the zikr of Allah, which is salah, and ghaflat from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, whatever the name it is, cannot simultaneously be in the same place. So if I am in my salah and I am ghafil, then I am not in salah. I am just standing there. How does that happen? Because our foundation, I won't even say our foundation is weak, because we don't have a foundation. We need to get this foundation, and that getting the foundation is through working on Iman. How do you work on Iman? You work on Iman by two things. And inshallah that we'll look in the next episode. But right now, working on Iman, just to give you a thumbnail sketch of that, we work on Iman by two things. One is by reflecting on the glory and magnificence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Serious reflection, not thinking something and your phone in your hand. No, throw the phone. Serious reflection on the glory and magnificence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And allowing that glory and magnificence to sink into the heart and the mind and the soul. And the second thing is serious reflection on the ni'mat, the blessings of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And to allow that reflection to result in the shukr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, on thanking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in every way. Right? Reflection on the glory and magnificence of Allah, and reflection on the shukr of Allah, on the blessings of Allah for which we thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. These are the two ways in which we can build this platform of Iman. This is what Rasulullah did with the Sahaba in Makkah, and of course continuously. It's not as if he stopped doing it in Medina. But I'm just saying Makkah is because we are looking at the hadith of Jundubbin Abdullah anhu. So he is referring specifically to that period where he said, we learned Iman, then we learned the Qur'an, and when we learned the Qur'an, it reinforced and strengthened our Iman. I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to enable us to focus on the right things and the clear things, and to enable us to live our lives in a way where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is pleased with us. Wa sallallahu ala nabiyil kareem wa alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in bi rahmatika ya arhamar rahimin. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.